Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Daniela Brill, Tech at Work writer for the Washington Post. Today, we're going to discuss the future of innovation and how workplace culture has changed over the course of the pandemic. Later, we'll hear from Kweilin Ellingrud, senior partner at McKinsey Company. But first, I'm joined by Aaron Levie, the co-founder and CEO of Box. Aaron, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Thanks, Danielle. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you again. Well, let's get started. For people who aren't familiar with Box, can you just tell us a little bit about what Box does?
Yeah, so Box is a platform that helps enterprises securely store, share, manage, and work with all of their most important business data. So their critical contracts, financial information, marketing assets, intellectual property, basically anything that an enterprise wants to be able to securely work with. We have a cloud platform that helps manage that information. We have over 100,000 customers, and about 67+% of the Fortune 500 uses our platform in some way.
Got it. And so, Aaron, I've got to start with AI. Obviously, everybody's talking about it. You seem to be a big fan of the release of some of the new generative AI systems that have created a big splash. And obviously, these are systems that can create content or images from a basic prompt. Tell us a little bit about why you're such a fan of these systems.
Yeah, so the real breakthrough in the past couple of years has, as you noted, really been generative AI. And correspondingly, these large language models that were trained off of just an incredible amount of text all around the internet. And what companies like OpenAI have produced is really an understanding of language, at least in a mathematical sense, and the probability of how words will flow in a sequence based on just again, just an incredible amount of mining of all of the world's data. And why that's really powerful is, in the most specific way, what we've seen with ChatGPT is you can ask a question and it can basically create a predictive response to that question. We've seen it with Bing, ChatGPT, and others. But the reason why we get really excited by this at Box is we have a platform where there are tens of billions of documents that are stored. And in each one of those documents is an incredible amount of business value. It could be a contract, it could be a patent, it could be research, it could be critical meeting notes. And in the past, it's been very, very hard, in many cases, cost prohibitive to try and take AI and help customers really understand what's inside of that information. And with large language models that we've seen with the example of ChatGPT, this has actually become much more affordable, much more efficient, and much more general purpose. And so we imagine in the future, you could be looking at a contract and you could say, what's the riskiest, what are the riskiest clauses in this contract? Or please summarize the key terms of this contract, or please add critical information like the date that it's going to be, due, and structure that, and then create a workflow around it. So these are things that previously really only humans could have done in any kind of reasonable way. But now, for the first time, AI can solve these types of problems with a high degree of accuracy and at a vastly lower price than what we would be able to do, with any kind of human labor. And so this is a real breakthrough in terms of certainly what we can build in the future at Box, but frankly, how enterprise software is likely going to work in the future as well. We see just a tremendous amount of opportunity for how software will become more intelligent. You'll be able to automate way more tasks, and it can frankly free up individuals and humans to go and actually work on much more important things than a lot of the daily drudgery that goes into our daily work.
Yeah, those are some interesting applications for sure. I do want to bring up, obviously, we've seen some early problems with these tools, right? Everything from, Bing's chat mode, calling itself Sydney and talking about how it wanted to be human and express emotions. Also some other serious flaws, some inaccuracies, kind of making up stuff when it can't exactly pull things together the right way. Is this in its current form ready for any prime time usage? And what would this mean for workers who may be asked to use this?
Yeah, so again, it's really important to separate ChatGPT from the underlying technology, which is this large language model. And ChatGPT is, if you ask it a question, it doesn't actually know the answer to that question. It knows the sequence of words that most likely is going to follow that question. And so it's trained off of all of the data in the world and on the internet. And as we know, there are a lot of places on the internet where either there's misinformation or where the internet is not just full of facts. You have a lot of fiction, even intentionally, that these types of systems are trained off of. So its job is really not to produce facts or not or not. Its job is just to be able to write out words in a way that is sort of the highest probability answer to a question or a prompt. And so it's really important to think about where can you then best apply that type of technology. Going to ChatGPT directly and asking for a question and then just sort of trusting the answer is maybe not a great use case. Being able to use ChatGPT to quickly brainstorm an idea or to review writing that you've already done and it could improve it in certain ways because of all of the information it's been trained on. These are great use cases for something like ChatGPT. But when you take a look at the underlying technology, the AI models themselves, what they're really, really good at is, again, understanding or synthesizing human language and then being able to predictably answer things or prompts based on that. And so what's really powerful is when you give it an existing set of facts. So you're not asking the AI model to tell you a fact, you're giving it the facts, but now you use AI to better be able to interact with those facts. Where you can now query them more efficiently. You can synthesize them. You can create summarization. You can probe with specific questions about a set of data that you might already have. That's really where we see a lot of the power in the enterprise. So a lot of the use cases, again, that we've seen with ChatGPT, where it's giving maybe not accurate answers, or Bing, where it's not giving accurate answers. These are probably less of the relevant use cases that we would expect to see in an enterprise, as much as really using the underlying language model to apply it to a much broader set of use cases. And that's where we see it be really, really powerful. But again, I think it just, I think further emphasizes that humans are going to remain a core part of everything in the future. We're not going to be, for any time soon, being in a position where we could fully automate away really any major task or set of tasks. And this always is going to provide a role for humans to help stitch together a lot of the work that maybe AI is doing. And in some cases, we'll move more into being an editor of some of that AI's work. But still, I think, frankly, we're going to be creating the vast majority of all of the things that the AI is going to go and maybe improve or automate or streamline or make more efficient in some capacity.
So in terms of enterprise AI, I know one of the concerns that a lot of people have is feeding an AI system, potentially sensitive information and having that model learn off of your information. And then, does that get used in other ways? I guess, how do you address that in your ideal world? Would every company have its own sort of internal protected AI, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways this could play out. And first and foremost, any customer using our AI or any of the partners that we work with, it has full transparent visibility into what happens with their data. And so we think that one of the most likely and common use cases is that you would maybe have data in box and you would leverage AI, but that AI can't train against your data. So anything you do with that AI model is effectively, treated as a black box or ephemeral, and the system is not sort of improving or learning from any of that data. That's going to be just, sort of fundamental to anything that we do in the AI space. But over time, we can imagine a world where enterprises might have their own trained models just on their data. And that's where you would see even more powerful use cases. So imagine an organization that had, its HR data or HR documents, training a specific model that then any employee could go to and ask questions or be able to get feedback or support. These are incredibly powerful opportunities for enterprise, because now they have so much data that they can turn into real business value, as opposed to it being just sort of locked away in databases or storage systems where they're not actually getting and creating ongoing value from that information. So we do think that enterprise-specific trained models will be a thing in the future. But for today's use cases, really the governing model has to be that the AI system is not being trained off of your proprietary enterprise data, and that's how we operate with all of our customers.
Got it. And in terms of that, sort of, if businesses were to begin using these kinds of systems where AI is doing some work for them, I guess what risks exist if it's not obviously the Chat GPT risks because we're applying it in a different way here? What kind of risks do exist, and how should we think about those, or should companies think about those as they consider applying AI to their systems?
Well, I think it's really important that enterprises understand the explainability of how AI is coming up with its answers. For instance, as we imagine a lot of these use cases, anytime an AI is creating a suggestion or doing some action, it's super important that the AI sort of explains why it did that, where the underlying data maybe came from to make that decision, and then the human in that sort of workflow probably needs to be in a position where they can quickly review that and actually sort of validate the assumptions that are being made from the AI. I think we're many years, maybe decades away from a scenario where you would just instantly trust whatever the decision is that the AI is doing without any other kind of inspection or validation from a human. So that is sort of years out from any of the use cases that we imagine. But I think companies need to think about a bunch of sort of considerations. The data privacy aspect was one that you just mentioned. How you actually incorporate AI into workflows in an organization. What are the internal sort of decisions that a company makes around the kind of quote unquote ethics or maybe norms of using AI? I think one question that's going to come up quite a bit is, can you use ChatGPT to write an employee performance review or to write an internal business memo? These are really interesting, both societal questions, but also business specific questions. Will different companies adopt, different hygiene or norms around these kinds of use cases? I think we're, really just starting in November, kind of kicked off a new wave of just fundamental questions we have to be asking. How much of that manual work that we're doing, with our technology is going to be done in the future, or how much will just kind of be completely automated for us behind the scenes. There's a recent stat from GitHub where a significant portion of code that now is being generated from their GitHub Copilot feature, which is this auto generation of code, is now being done by AI. And so that's an incredible stat to just within basically a 2-year period. A very significant portion of code that's being generated now is being done through AI, and that's something that we would just never have anticipated, half a decade ago. So we're in a very fast-moving, industry and space. Companies are going to have to wrestle with where they apply AI, and but I think what's important is that companies do start to think about what is the role of AI in their organization. I think we see a future where, while we don't necessarily know how you get ahead in AI because we don't know exactly what becomes commoditized versus what remains differentiated, what we do know is that by not leveraging at all, you will fall behind. And so that's I think a sort of a way to think through the kind of dynamic that we're going to be seeing for years to come.
And is Box, I know you mentioned this was sort of an exciting idea for Box, or opportunity for Box, and how it could be applied to its own processes and what it offers companies. Is Box experimenting with this? Are you personally experimenting with this?
I can't make any announcements today. I've been told by the team. So, but what I would say is that, we have been working on AI related projects for nearly a decade. As a content cloud, we're building really the end-to-end life cycle of everything that you do with content in a single cloud platform. So the storage, the sharing, the workflow, the e-signature, the analytics, the collaboration. And so you can imagine that intelligence sort of is something that gets infused into all of those use cases. How do you secure your data? How do we do that more intelligently? This is already an area that we apply AI and machine learning to, but we see even more use cases over time that are possible. You take something like being able to summarize documents or streamline a workflow. These are really exciting possible use cases for us in the future. So no announcements. However, I would just say, you can kind of see what type of innovation we've done in the past, and it shows, I think, how excited we are for this space.
Got it. Darn it on the announcements, though. Let's quickly switch over. I want to talk a little bit about return to office. Last
Yeah.
we spoke, you had actually mentioned something that, at the time, I believe Box was still remote. I wanted to sort of update that. Is that still the current policy, and what's expected for the future?
Yeah, so we've actually been fairly flexible. I mean, during the kind of peak and throughout the pandemic, we were largely remote. We had very kind of health conscious policies on this front. Over the past 6 to 9 months, we've now opened up our offices globally, and we really encouraged these sort of in real life days, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we've been seeing, really, near exponential growth of participation in coming back to the office on those days, and we've really set the expectation that 2 to 3 days a week, and some people might do more, but 2 to 3 days a week is sort of the right approach for us, for at least folks near an office. Now, through the pandemic, we've probably doubled the amount of hiring that we've done remotely, and so for anybody who's remote, they're going to basically remain remote, unless they obviously move to a hub location. But we do think it's really important to bring Boxers, back together on a regular cadence, where applicable. And we think there's a lot of power in the collaboration that happens, the osmosis that happens, the training of newer employees, that really is important. And we do believe that the future is hybrid. So and so we want to best balance both. How do you work remotely and have more flexibility, and really drive and get a lot of value from that in-person collaboration? So I would say we are firmly in that kind of hybrid camp.
And is that a mandate? I'm sorry, just to clarify those 2 to 3 days. Is that a mandate or just like a suggestion?
If there's something in between mandate and suggestion, that's where we're at. So it's an expectation, but it's not. We also are, I think, mature and sort of professional, and we think that people will be adults about it. So we know that some people have childcare constraints, or healthcare constraints, and so for those folks, it's not a mandate. We believe in flexibility. We were already flexible before the pandemic, but it's an expectation in the sense that it's kind of putting a flag in the ground around the kind of culture that we want to build. I think companies that don't put that flag in the ground end up probably more veered toward being largely just remote. And we actually think that's super cool for a lot of companies. But we believe in actually the power of balancing these two worlds, which means you do have to sort of set the kind of expectations and have a rhythm for the organization. So we've looked at companies like Asana, we've looked at Apple, we've looked at Google, OpenAI, many others that I think have found this good sort of hybrid model where you do build kind of critical mass, and you have that rhythm of folks coming in, but you do have more flexibility than you would have had before the pandemic. And that's kind of how we view things.
So speaking of Google, Google and Amazon and others have actually created mandates for 3 days a week. And I know Disney just came out expecting for 4, and again, a mandate. I guess, what is your stance on those pushes to sort of have like employees mandated back in for 3 to 4 days a week?
Well, I love it in the sense of getting to watch different approaches. I think it's so healthy to be able to have a very dynamic ecosystem where we see some companies are going to be remote and virtual only. You get to sort of watch how that company collaborates and how they work. You have companies that are sort of very flexible, and so then that kind of veers a little bit more still remote. You have companies that have sort of established, hey, we're going to develop norms around our working style. I think that's companies like Asana, Uber, and others, where they have sort of created these in real life days. That's probably where you'll see us again firmly land. And then you have companies that have maybe taken more stances at the other end of that spectrum. Disney as an example. Maybe Amazon is somewhere in there, and I think it'll be exciting to see just how that plays out. I'm actually a fan of all models existing, and then I think companies have to choose their specific approach with their organization and their philosophy. I think this has been this sort of almost religious, type battle in a lot of cases. And I don't really see it as that. I think actually just companies need to land on an approach that works for them. Obviously, maybe certain employees won't like the approach that the company lands on, in which case, obviously, there's a lot of different types of options out there. But we believe we have a strong sense of our culture and the things that we've done over the years that make it a strong culture, and that kind of largely fits this hybrid model that we've landed on.
So, if the Bay Area is sort of leading the way on the number of companies that are allowing for remote work, I wonder if you
Yeah.
think this has any impact on Silicon Valley as an innovation hub or the expectation of what Silicon Valley offers.
Yeah, well, I do think I think if you kind of imagined a world where all of Silicon Valley was always remote, and I mean the location, the geography, if all of the companies were always remote within Silicon Valley, then you would sort of over a 50-year period, you would sort of say, well, then you don't really need to have a physical location for this hotbed of innovation. It just wouldn't make any sense because people are not actually physically required to be near each other for anything. And so I think that and that was really during the peak of the pandemic. That was this open conversation was, is there a Silicon Valley anymore? But I think now what you've seen is with enough, you have enough companies that are now coming back. You have a resurgence of startups. Y Combinator is now being done again physically, here as opposed to being fully virtual. So I think it's a fantastic place to start a company, to grow a company. I think offices are continuing to have more and more workforces show up, but it will be different forever because of this hybrid approach. And companies at the same time are hiring for more locations. We did multiple acquisitions throughout the pandemic. None of them were in Silicon Valley. So that means that there's incredible teams all around the world that are building amazing companies. We were fortunate enough to bring a few of those on board. And so I think what's great is that we have a situation where literally any team can create an amazing company from nearly anywhere in the world. I think that's only a good thing for innovation and the digital ecosystem in general. And at the same time, I think that Silicon Valley is still going to play an important role because I think having a physical concentration of critical mass, whether it's talent or VCs, or board members, I think that is helpful to the innovation cycle. So I think we're just going to see again a very dynamic, diverse approach to how this all plays out.
Well, Aaron, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I definitely want to touch base with you on layoffs. Obviously, we've seen a lot of movement in the tech industry, tech companies that have slashed hundreds and thousands of jobs. First of all, I want to get your take on the industry and also any insight to, has there been any layoffs at Box or are there any coming?
Yeah, so in our case, we're maybe a little bit more fortunate on this front because we went through an exercise about 3 years ago, going through the entire business and setting a foundation for profitable growth at scale. And as a part of that foundation, we had to make a bunch of operational decisions and create a lot of hygiene internally for how we open up new investments, what areas do we grow in, what product innovation can we invest in. And that put us in a position where we have a very, very rigorous process for how we make investments across the company. And so I think unlike some companies, and this is just, we were fortunate to have done this years ago, but unlike some companies, we didn't, dramatically overinvest relative to our growth rate or kind of what was happening in the industry. And so that's let us put up well over 20% operating margin, results in, for instance, the past couple of quarters. So kind of a much higher degree of profitability. And that's just, again, a discipline that now is baked into the company, and it's how we've executed over the past year and how we will continue to do. So other than some, kind of one-off situations where we might have to move some funding from one organization to another or adapt some individuals' roles, we have not had to do, the sort of broad-based layoffs that we've seen. But that's really only just due to the fact that we got ahead of this many years ago. So we were more just, kind of fortunate from a timing standpoint to build that into the business. When you look at across the rest of the industry, I do think that we're in an era of basically businesses that for years and years have just been funded with more and more constant venture capital, in many cases losing large amounts of money. I think we're in a period where, probably starting with Wall Street, but all the way down now into private markets, these businesses and startups are realizing that they have to be profitable at some point at scale. And so you're going through really a kind of a cultural change in Silicon Valley where costs do matter, profit does matter, building sustainable long-term businesses matter, and that's really just I think the period that we're in right now. But I think as a result of going through this and at the other end of it, I think you're going to have very healthy businesses that get built that still have an incredible amount of opportunity ahead. So I just think this is a sort of a period where there's that cultural shift happening in the valley.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining. Please stay with us for the next segment of this conversation.
At ADP, we understand business today looks nothing like it did yesterday. While it's more unpredictable, its possibilities are endless. From paying your people from anywhere to supporting your talent everywhere. We use data-driven insights to design HR solutions and services to help businesses of all sizes work smarter today so they can have more success tomorrow.
Hello there, I'm Suzanne Kelly, CEO and publisher of the Cypher Brief, a national security-focused news organization. Today, we're talking tech at work, and I can't think of a better time to have this conversation with so many people going back and forth between home and the office. Joining me to discuss this is Aaron Smith. Aaron is Senior Vice President of Global Product Management and User Experience at ADP. Aaron, nice to see you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Great to be here.
I really love information and how it helps us understand the direction that trends are moving in. So I'm wondering if we could start off by talking just a little bit about what trends are really fueling success for remote and hybrid work, and what are the challenges now that are facing HR?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot to digest, first of all, and the amount of dynamics around the definition of workspace in and of itself is going to be constantly changing. That's our view and our take, and the reason is because obviously the experience of the pandemic surprised us all, and then coming out of the pandemic, the forms of how teams work and where your employees potentially work is going to be constantly evolving and changing. And so we expect that trend to continue. And with that in mind, how teams work together or how individual employees work together is really going to be an important part of what is a productive place for an individual or a team to work. And so with that trend expecting to continue, the question is, how do you face that challenge head on? And there's not one answer that's going to be afforded to be able to resolve that. But a couple of key factors that we believe are going to be most important is really having a very close pulse on the sentiment and the engagement of your employees. First and foremost, whether they're remote, holistically, they're in office or somewhere in between, having a very incremental and a constant way to check in with your employees and your workforce at large, we believe is going to be a real key skill and tool to be able to tap into this constant flurry of change between home and office.
Yeah, it's not always easy for folks to do. And I'm wondering, are there ways that workers themselves can kind of be a part of, enabling sort of innovation and business growth during all of this newness that we're seeing?
Yeah. So we do like to start with some facts as well and trying to answer the question on where employees can help with this particular challenge. And we have an ADP Research Institute, ADPRI, that actually did conduct a survey very recently in 2022 across a pretty wide swath of employees, and found that employees on a 2/3 basis out of that survey are willing to actually make a job change if they're not afforded the opportunity to work in a hybrid model. And so the question is, where can employees be best positioned to help make that unlock more innovation and help make that happen? And the answer really comes back to the employer. Are you able to really engage with your workforce and your employees, as I mentioned earlier? But also, there's very likely a lot of untapped skills and untapped value within your existing workforce that you might not even realize. And so having a channel of new ideas and new innovation constantly come from your employees directly for those untapped skills that you may not know about, we've found and we believe is going to be a very key way for employees to be at the forefront of that. And just to maybe make it more of a real use case, we leverage our own employees as essentially our what we call client, or if you want to call it customer zero. So we test our products, we use our products, and those ideas continue to flourish from our own employees in our business. And we'd encourage that for anybody to really take advantage of.
I'm curious, are there some tools and technologies that you're finding are pretty effective when it comes to providing workers ways to make it a little bit easier to go from home to office?
So of course, it's in our name. We love it, but data, we believe is the secret ingredient to empowering your employees, empowering your leaders, and empowering your workforce. Um, of course, that context switching, right, between being at home, being in the office, but then maybe being at home and having to deal with personal situations amongst your office work really means that the connection point between us as perhaps consumers and how we use technology in our daily lives and how we then use technology for our work, that gap in and of itself obviously is closer and closer and closer now more than ever. So very key is to personalize the tools and the technologies and even the data that you have for your employees and your leaders is going to be a real most important tool to be able to employ.
Yeah, and I would think that having access to great data, one of the great benefits is being able to understand what might be coming. So I'm wondering, what do you think the future is for remote and hybrid work? Where do you think this is all headed?
So we do have a bit of a real good view with the data that we have at our disposal with our business. We pay 1 in 6 employees in the U.S., and so it's a pretty constant stream view of what's happening with the workforce at large. And I wouldn't say we've got any magical forward-looking statements. I think what we're seeing in the data is really the constant change and expectations of unlocking productivity and innovation out of your workforce. And we see that in the change of pay elements and wellness and health and all aspects of your employee workforce. And then we try to obviously offer the technology to be able to unlock value out of that and the data that we're afforded. So where it's headed is not a single destination. Just to cut to the chase on that, it's constant check, as I mentioned earlier, constant awareness of sentiment with your employees, constant looking at the data that you're afforded and the skills that are there yet to be untapped. And then you're able to adapt to whatever changes lie ahead for the mode of workforce, the mode of location that you might have for your business.
Yeah, I think we've all felt exactly that since COVID, of course, this whole new reality and being able to constantly change and using data to understand that, I think is a great idea. Aaron Smith is Senior Vice President of Global Product Management and User Experience with ADP. Aaron, thank you so much for being here to talk about tech at work.
Thank you, Suzanne. Really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
All right, now back to my colleagues at the Washington Post.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Daniela Burrell, Tech at Work writer for the Washington Post. I'm now joined by Kweilin Ellingrud. She's senior partner at McKinsey Company. Kweilin, welcome to Washington Post Live. Kweilin, McKinsey has collected some data on hybrid work and found that Americans want more flexible jobs. Have you found any specific trends by industry?
Indeed. I think the trends that we see by industry are that tech workers, computer programmers, finance executives, legal, art, design, job categories all have a bit more levels of flexibility than other work. Ones at the bottom end of ability to be flexible in terms of location work would be frontline workers, right? So food service, customer service and sales, some of those types of work.
Gotcha. And are there any differences in how Americans see remote work depending on their demographics or where they live?
Yeah, there's a big difference both in who wants to work flexibly and who gets to work flexibly or has the ability to. I think at the highest level, what we see is about 58% of people, of workers, being able to work at least one day a week, some much more than that, from home. So 58% of people can work flexibly, at least for part of the week, meaning 42% have to work all days a week in person. But if we take that 58% and we break it down even further, about 35% of workers, about a third, can work all days a week from home or remotely, and about 23% can work just some days a week. You know, when they're offered flexibility, workers tend to take it, right? Almost 9 out of 10 workers take that flexibility, 87% of them. And on average, they work from home about 3 days a week.
Got it. Workers want flexibility. We've heard that before. Has any of your data shown whether there's actually a correlation between performance and remote work?
I think it's too early to say, right? It was interesting because early in the pandemic, a number of CEOs were asking, well, how do I measure productivity now? How do I know if my workers are working effectively? And I said, well, I hope it wasn't that you were measuring productivity before by watching your employees sitting at your desk or sitting at their desk and assuming that they were actually productive, right? Hopefully we had better measures of productivity and performance than that. And I think now where there are jobs where productivity and performance is more objective, I think that will allow for greater flexibility because the measures will be clearer and more objective. Where performance is maybe more subjective, perhaps deeper collaboration, it's more of a team effort, it's harder to tell what one individual did. I think that worries me because it leaves space for subjectivity, for maybe misinterpretation of productivity levels. And it's, you know, the jury is still out. We will see if not being in the office at all or as much as others leads to different perceptions of actually being productive. But based on historical research, that is a concern of mine. For example, when you have two identical resumes, a man and a woman, and the woman puts active parent-teacher association member or any other sort of measure that she's a very active parent, that woman is much less likely, about 85% plus less likely to get the job. And that's because of the parental associations and assumptions that we make about her commitment to work. And my concern with more flexible work and being out of the workplace physically is that those unconscious biases, conscious and unconscious biases, are attached to those who are less present and therefore fewer opportunities, less visibility at work, less top of mind when big step up opportunities come about.
Got it. And that actually bleeds into where I wanted to take this conversation was understanding, whether remote work has any impact on career trajectory. It sounds like it's still too early to tell. I guess I wonder if the same is true, sort of what you were saying about men and women. If women are taking more of these remote opportunities, does that say something about what we might see in the trajectory of men and women's careers?
I do think overall there's a concern because if you compare our workforce levels to pre-COVID, we're now fully recovered in terms of overall number of jobs. In fact, we have a few more men in the workforce than we did pre-COVID 3 years ago or so, but we have quite a few fewer women, between 500,000 and 900,000 fewer women in the workforce, depending on which month you're counting. And those women typically stepped out right around the time that many schools were going hybrid and have steadily come back very slowly, but not yet fully recovered. And what we know about women is that when they step out of the workforce, on average, they're out of the workforce for longer, their unemployment is stickier, and that when they return, that sometimes has, career-long impacts on their career trajectory and their income. So I do worry about that. In terms of trends, in terms of hybrid work, we know that about 61% of men can work flexibly, only 52% of women can work flexibly, so a different mix there. But in terms of who actually wants to work flexibly, we see interesting patterns. People who are more junior in the organization want to work more flexibly, more than those who are more senior. Women, on average, want to work more flexibly than men, and those with children also want to work more flexibly than those without children. So both patterns in who wants to work flexibly that are frankly quite the opposite on average of who gets to work flexibly or has the most flexibility to work from home more days a week.
Got it. And how has remote work culture transformed sectors like real estate, transit, and technology?
I think remote work is affecting real estate prices, of course. We were just talking earlier with Aaron at Box about that in Silicon Valley. I think we are still in early days of seeing is 3 days a week, being able to work from home, does that actually change where people live permanently? Or, does it require 5 days a week working remotely before people are willing to move outside a broader radius? So we did see during COVID a huge shift and a lot of moves to more tier 2 cities, right, outside of very large cities. We think some portion of that is permanent, and some jobs will be geographically flexible permanently, but many may not be, right? As we see with the mandates that you were describing earlier of 2, 3, 4 days a week back in the office. So some effect there, but we'll wait to see how much of that will stick permanently. And especially as you think about dual career households, one person may be flexible, but the other not. And so do they need to be closer to a city or the previous location of their work? That all remains to be seen.
And we're seeing more and more CEOs tell their employees they need to return to the office. Given how much we've opened up since the early days of the pandemic, I wonder, are there still any risks associated with that kind of mandate?
I think there are. I think there's, a broad spectrum from, 5 days a week mandated in the office on the one end of the spectrum, fully remote all the time on the other end of the spectrum, save maybe some cultural events and a few annual events. In the middle, though, I do see most companies falling somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Many of them saying, based on the type of the work that you're doing or the group that you're in, we will decide how many days a week makes sense. And we'd like your team to come in on, the same days. We heard Aaron describe Tuesdays and Thursdays. That might be consistent across the company, or that might be more tailored to the type of the work or the group. I've also seen, for instance, some organizations say, we're going to have a consistent approach, but actually technology, because coding can be done so effectively from home, and we're having a hard time retaining our tech talent, maybe more a few months ago than more recently. We're actually going to have tech work more remotely than the rest of the organization, but for everybody else, here's the way we're going to approach it. So we've seen a really broad spectrum of work from home and flexible options. But to your question of, is there a risk? I think within the same industry, there is a risk that some will have a flight to companies that are more flexible. So one example of that is on LinkedIn data, we saw the minority of job postings in terms of being flexible on geographic requirements, but that minority of job postings got the majority of resume drops, and so much broader set of resumes and applications for jobs that are flexible in these days.
And we've seen, the trend of employers who were pretty flexible when the pandemic started and in the early days start to sort of reel it back a little bit and start asking more people to come back to the office. Do you think that trend will continue?
In pockets, yes. I think we'll start to see clarity on where different companies are landing. And frankly, I think the clarity, clear communication, clarity on how many days will be very helpful for all employees, right, to just understand what the requirements are, as opposed to guessing at where we might end up. And as we were describing before, I think a broad range of experiments will also help us understand when does remote work, or primarily remote work with some in-person collaboration, make more sense. We do see a number of companies focusing on making the most of that in-person time, whether it's your Tuesday and Thursdays in the office or more days a week, focusing on things like celebration and kind of celebrating key moments and milestones together. Communication, not all communication, but certain types of communication, and coaching and collaboration, and focusing that in-person time to make the most of it, so that people don't feel like, I came in all the way, but then I was just sitting in my cubicle and on, Zoom calls or Teams calls all day. I think making sure that it feels like it was a great experience, that it did connect me more deeply to other colleagues when I do go into the office is quite important.
So obviously we're in a new era of work, given everything you just said. What are the best ways do you think are there to attract, retain, and motivate employees in this new environment?
I think employees these days are really looking more for purpose than they were before. Interesting, we've talked a lot about the great attrition overall, and we've seen unprecedented levels of people quitting their jobs. Interestingly, about a third of the people who quit their jobs quit with no other offer in hand, which we have not seen before, right? So there's real both confidence in the job market that I can find another role, a comparable role, and there's more boldness around, and I want to follow my passion. I want to go where I'm valued, where I enjoy my colleagues. And so certainly people are looking for new jobs partially because of pay. That was one big motivator. Another would be because of advancement. But the third most highly ranked reason, as the number one driver for why I'm looking for a new job, is flexibility. And so I think as we think about all of those things that employees now are looking for, this sort of broader alignment to purpose where I feel valued, as well as pay, which in some cases may be more table stakes, and flexibility will become increasingly important.
We've also been seeing, this mass wave of layoffs. And I'm curious, given the saturation in the market of top talent, how can employees stand out?
Yeah, I think we are overall in a shift towards a greater focus on skills. So emphasizing the skills that you have, the experience, of course, is one way. I think many employers are saying it doesn't matter so much the four-year degree or the master's degree that you have. I'm much more focused on the skills and the experience that you have and that you bring to the job. And so I think both talking about those, quantifying those, verifying those in some cases can help people stand out in a more crowded job market.
Wonderful. I think that's a great piece of advice, Kweilin. Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have here on Washington Post Live. So thanks to all of you as well for joining us. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information about all of our upcoming programs. I'm Daniela Brill. Thanks for joining us.